Well, we are in Revelation, the 14th chapter, and we went through the 13th verse of that chapter, although we left a little bit undealt with between verses 9 and 13 that I hope to clear up, to get out on the table, and then we'll move on to the second half of this chapter. But if you recall, in 14, we look and there's all this devastation, terrible tribulation taking place, coming through 13, as much is involved as in the book, or as much is the case in the book. And in 14, we see an encouraging sign for the Christian, because we've dealt with in 13 the two beasts, and these beasts are terrific in an awful way. One from the sea and one from the land, and they're wreaking havoc on mankind. Both of these beasts serve a common leader, which is the great dragon, Satan himself. And so this is a very discouraging and very upsetting picture that we've had painted in verse 13. So as we then turn to chapter 14, we see an uplifting sign. And that is, we look at Mount Zion, the spiritual Jerusalem we're looking at, and standing there on Mount Zion is the Lamb. Not only the Lamb, but those who are His, the 144,000 that represent the saved Jewish Christians that we read were sealed by God and have been protected by God throughout all of these events that have been taking place. And they are there and they are singing a new song. We're going to see that song, I believe, come up again in the 15th chapter. I believe we'll get into that tonight. So it is, in short, a song of victory. They're jubilant. We're going to see again as we continue forward that they have been saved. They have been protected as God has promised them throughout this. So with that, as we describe the individuals who are with the Lamb on the mountain, it's again telling God's people that I am in control and I am here for you, and all these things are according to my will and will work out for the good. So continuing with that then, in verse 12, we noted that we summarize what is said before by saying, here's a reason for patience. Here's, Christians, why you remain where you are, faithful to who you are faithful to. Because these are things that have taken place or are taking place. In verse 6, we see the angel flying overhead. This angel is representative of the church. It's flying overhead because the church, and we could go to other New Testament passages and see that God communicates now through His Son, and that His Son, Jesus Christ, His body on earth is the church, and that He conveys His message through His people. And we see this angel that's flying over is preaching an eternal what? Verse 6. Gospel, right? To proclaim, and I saw an angel flying directly overhead with the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth and to every nation, tribe, and language. And he said with a loud voice, fear God and give Him glory, because the hour of His judgment has come. So we have the message of the church here. Furthermore, His judgment was coming, not only that which is to come, but His judgment on those who have crucified the very Son of God and those who are rebelling against Him. With that then, the second angel, and these messages are very closely related. It's why they're given one after another. The second angel gives a message that Babylon, the great city, has fallen. We noted this is hundreds and hundreds of years after the literal Babylon had fallen. It's speaking of Jerusalem. So these people are being told she's fallen. This beast that has been persecuting you, that has been putting you to death, is already judged. She is no more. Meaning it's indefinite. It's about to happen, and it is finite when it does happen. The literal words are what's actually said by this angel is fallen is Babylon, great she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion, or the wrath of her sexual immorality. I want to reiterate this wine because it plays into what we have drawn out in these following verses. The wine, the wine of her fornication and immorality, sexual immorality, is language that's used all throughout the Old Testament to describe apostate Israel. She is to be wed to God, loyal to God. They have a covenant, they have a contract, an agreement, such as a wedding vow. And she's been unfaithful to these other gods. Now, she made all nations drink of the wine of that wrath. He's using this analogy because he takes it a step further, and we talked about a hangover last week, right? When you linger much at the wine, when you drink from that cup, you end up with a terrible circumstance the next day. Sick, with pounding headache, so on and so forth. Well, the analogy being used here is that she is drunk on her immorality, and God has also forced others to go about and with this immorality. You ask, well, how is that the case? Well, consider the persecution and the pressure on the church. Judaism is a recognized religion by Rome. To do business, to participate in the marketplace, to buy food, and all these things, you had to participate in the religions that were taking place in that day. One extreme example of this is how much does New Testament talk about not eating meat sacrificed to idols? It's a common theme, right? Did you ever wonder why? That is the majority of the meat that's at the marketplace. It's almost all been sacrificed to idols. That means that when you would go to the marketplace to buy this meat, it's already participated in a heathen ritual. Furthermore, the reason they did that, in buying that meat, you're supporting that religion, and you were supposed to get the blessings or the power of the God it was sacrificed to. That's why many would go looking for a particular God that this meat was sacrificed to. That's why when the Gentiles are being converted to the church, they meet in Jerusalem. They say, abstain from things strangled and meat sacrificed to idols. I forgot drinking blood, right? Refrain from blood. Think about it. Those are the three things that they find necessary to teach the Gentiles about. It is common. Well, how did Jerusalem, or how did Israel participate in that? They should have been the shining light in the time of this heathenistic culture. But instead, as we saw in the previous chapter, they bowed down to the beast Rome. Right? They're supporting Rome, and they're going to use Rome to persecute the Christians. And so they're getting others to participate in the persecution of God. Questions or comments on that? So that leads us then to the third angel of this chapter. And we'll start in verse 9. Another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast in its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. And he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, these worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of his name." Here is a call for endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God, and for their faith in Jesus. "And I heard a voice from heaven saying, 'Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them.'" So now the third angel comes and he draws their attention to this divide that we were talking about. There's really only two people in this world, right? There's one division. Those on God's side and those on Satan's side. And here he is saying that everyone on Satan's side is going to drink from this wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of anger. It's symbolic language representing the fact that not only is Jerusalem going to be utterly destroyed, she's going to be forced to drink from this cup of anger, but also those who follow after them. So this pressure was on the Christian all along to Judaize. I touched on this last week. This would have been this market pressure, social pressure, and persecution would have been pressures for the Christians to come back, and the Jews would accept them if they just kept all their rituals, right? And so there's this pressure to start teaching that Jewish law is part of Christianity. As you read throughout Galatians, we use it in all kinds of different contexts. But Galatians says, though any other, or first he starts by saying, Paul does, that I marvel that you are so soon removed from the gospel onto another, which is not another at all. Paul is saying, I am shocked that you would leave the gospel of Christ for another gospel. And then emphasizes that point by saying it's not even the gospel. It's not good news. And then as we go throughout the book of Galatians, see, we use that. He goes on and say, though a man or an angel or anyone else teach you another doctrine, let him be accursed. And he repeats it a couple times. We use that in all kind of contexts, and it's relevant for all kind of contexts. But in the original context, as we go throughout Galatians, Judaizing Christians are the primary factor he seems to be discussing. That's the gospel they're being swaying back into. And so he's saying, stay patient. Stay strong. Stay where you are on the Lord's side. Why? Because those on his side are going to be destroyed. 11 speaks of the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. Genesis 9 and 28 talks about Abraham looking down into the valley where Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities are. And it was as though there was a great furnace pumping out the smoke. Remember that John keeps going back to these three images of judgment. Egypt, Sodom, and Babylon. Here he's drawing on the imagery from Sodom to point out how awful it is going to be. They shall never have rest. Well, how is this the case that they shall never have rest? With the destruction of Jerusalem, Judaism is forever destroyed. We're going to look at Leviticus, the 26th chapter in a few minutes. It's going to predict this. They're never going to have a home. Even now, America is great enough that we said, okay, here's your land back. Do they really have their land? No. They're still pilgrims in their own land. Right? I had geography class in college, and got to the end of a particular test, and there was a bonus essay question. And it said, where did the Palestinian Israeli conflict start? Well, I just started writing about Abraham, Sarah, and Ishmael. Or not Ishmael, Hagar. After I wrote a couple sentences, I'm like, oh, this is the right answer. This isn't the answer that's going to get me the bonus points. He wants me to come ahead the better part of 2,000 years and write about the end of World War II, right? So I was able to give him that answer. But really, it started back prior to that. But they are judged. They never recover. There are those who believe that as we get later in this book, you'll see why. That sacrifice animals, the temple will be rebuilt, right? And the sacrifices of animals will continue, will restart again before the rapture, before the or during the tribulation, and before the 1,000-year reign. The problem with that, go ahead, Mike.
They are working on that in Israel. There's a group of those people. They're trying to perfect the red calf or the red steer it is. Has to be perfect. I think they got it. And
Yeah,
I
heard that.
duplicated all the, from the menorahs to the trumpets to everything to rebuild that temple. There is a group wanting to do that.
Yes,
That's a fact.
it is. And I'm glad you emphasized all those things, because that leads me right up to this next point. You know what they will never have, that according to this Old Testament law is so important? Can you think of anything that they will never have?
Mercy seat.
The mercy seat? Well, yeah. But in all fairness, the Ark of the Covenant never reappears in Scripture after the Babylonian captivity. So it likely wasn't there for a lot of the sacrifice. But good, absolutely great thought on that. The priesthood.
What?
The priesthood.
No.
Who can offer these sacrifices? The high priest.
Yeah.
The priest had to be, the Levites and the high priest had to be of Aaron's lineage. Now, we just went through our gospel meeting that emphasized the order of Christ, right? In our current day priesthood. But we can never have a Levitical priesthood. The reason being that all the records, all of them, are utterly destroyed in 70 AD. The people are so annihilated that they have no idea what tribe they're from. There is no Jews today. Ask me, a Jew, on the road today, and what I mean by that is there's lots of Jews. Ask them what tribe they're from. They don't talk in those terms anymore, do they? And there can never be a Levitical priesthood again because the tribe is gone. And all the genealogies and all the records are completely destroyed.
You know where they want to put their new temple, but
I do not.
they're doing it wrong.
Okay, that makes sense because that's the place of the,
So they're going to an awful lot of trouble, aren't
yeah. Yeah. So those are some thoughts, and I think you can see some application to how it is they'll never rest, right? And as they do die, bear in mind, a lot of these people are going to die horrific deaths. The Christians aren't the only ones die horrific deaths. I drew out that contrast between verse 11 and verse 13. Those on Satan's side have no rest. It goes up forever as an example of failure. But those of the Christian side, verse 13, will have rest. Now, there's a very subtle prelude here to or chapter 17. It's easy to miss, but chapter 15, I said 17, didn't I? I apologize for that. Chapter 15 is going to be about the Sabbath, the true Sabbath. Don't miss that note. In my Bible, I have it highlighted, both the non-resting and the rest, because that is leading to these next things that are going to take place. The Christians are going to have a rest, and chapter 15 is really going to get into that. Okay, so now some of the terms, and I had Kevin read last week the hymn, the battle hymn of the Republic, and I won't do that to Christian. It's not one of the easier songs to lead. But the reason we did is some of the language for that hymn comes from what we're about to read in these next verses. Before we get into these things, I want you to think about two things. Number one, we have harvesting. Right? We're going to have two harvests. One of wheat and one of grapes. What is different about the harvesting of wheat versus the harvesting of grape? If you are a wheat or if you are a grape. Here's what I'm getting at. If you are wheat, the harvesting process, does it protect you or destroy you?
It protects you because it separates you from the chaff.
Oh, and there's lots of parables along that very line, right? Grapes now. What do we do when we harvest grapes?
Throw them all together.
Throw them all together and then what?
Smash them.
Smash them. That will give you a mindset to read these next passages as we come forward. There's two harvestings taking place. One of protection and one of destruction. 14 through 16 is the harvest of protection. Would someone read those for me?
And I looked upon a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the crown thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped.
Yep. So, interesting imagery. It's like all of Revelation. It's just terrific imagery and amazing. But immediately, who do you picture on this cloud?
Jesus.
Jesus, the Son Man, right? That's significant because this is a harvesting of protecting. I mentioned a lot of people are dying, both Christians and non-Christians in this age. One is dying onto protection, is being reaped onto protection, and one is going to be utterly destroyed. Joel, the 3rd chapter, we don't have time to go here tonight for those of you taking notes. Joel 3, 9 through 13 is a supportive passage, one of the supportive passages for this idea of reaping. But also, I'll take you back mentally to Matthew 24, verses 30 and 32. When Jesus is talking about destruction in Jerusalem, is he's telling them all the signs are going to come. Remember verse 30, he says, just as when you look at the fig tree, do you remember what you do? You can look at that fig tree and know what the change of season's coming, right? So he says, pay attention. It's interesting, we're using the very same terminology is about the reaping. He's saying, be ready for the harvest. You can look at the fig tree and know when the harvest is coming. Be ready for the harvest. And here Jesus is talking about harvesting. All these Christians are dying, but they're being dying onto a death of protection and victory. Unless there's comments or questions, we'll go 17 through the end of the chapter. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, "Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine in the earth, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. That's 184 miles. We basically just described a lake. 184 miles long. By the way, coincidentally, that's the length of Israel, the land of Israel. 607 feet deep. A station, 4 feet deep is the bridle, about 4 feet deep. A station is about 607 feet. So that's how you get to the size. It's 184 miles long. So let's come back here, back up. Notice that the angel that's reaping gets its command. Where did the angel that does the reaping come from? Out of what?
Fire.
Close. The first angel.
Oh, okay. First thing that came up out of the temple.
Out of the temple. What we're saying is he's doing this on God's account. And out of the temple, what's the temple? The church. On behalf of the church. Right? The second angel, verse 18, is where Bob was going, came from the altar. He had the authority over fire. Remember the angel that took the incense and threw it down to the earth and caused all the havoc? This is action of judgment. Condemnation judgment. Not like the prior reaping. And so they're clustered, as Mike said, they're all thrown together, and it flows out as high as a horse's bridle for this length, 184 miles. I mentioned that's the length of Jerusalem, but also I think significant about that, 1,600 is 40 times 40. There's our numbers that we're emphasizing, that John uses over and over. This is physical completeness, emphasized over and over again. So this is a devastating judgment that's coming upon these people. Questions or comments? This next chapter is a lengthy one. It's 8 verses long, right? Instead of reading that, because we've only got 5 minutes, 6.5. I said 5. Bob got jumpy. He goes down at 5. So he thought he was late. So in 15, we have the 7 chalices introduced, or the 7 cups introduced. I want to take your mind through a couple of things. Philippians 4 and 17, Paul says, even though I'm poured out like a cup offering on the burnt offering. What we're going to see is these 7 chalices, they're judgments. And they're the 7-fold judgment of God upon Jerusalem. But we have followed right along the ritual of the sacrifice. What would happen is you would have the sacrifice, and then you'd have the trumpet blown. Remember, we started with the slain lamb, then the trumpets sounding, and the events happen to the trumpets. And then the drink offering, the last step, was poured on the burnt offering. The imagery here that we are going to see with these 7 cups is this. The saints are around the throne of God, and they're singing the song of Moses. we find two songs of Moses in the Old Testament. One's Exodus 15, the other one is Deuteronomy 32. Exodus 15 is right after crossing the Red Sea, and it's victorious. The Egyptians have just been flooded. The other one is with Joshua in Deuteronomy 32, and that is a victorious song right before they go into the Promised Land. They sang these songs on the Sabbath. They had daily sacrifices, and they had an additional sacrifice on the Sabbath. And in the morning, they sang the song from Deuteronomy 32, and in the evening, they sang the song from Exodus 15, the songs of Moses. These people have received their rest. And they have the true Sabbath. Doesn't the Hebrew writer talk about that? There remaineth yet a rest. That's how the non-Christians having no rest rolls into this. But also, the last step that I mentioned takes place is this drink offering is poured over the burnt offering. Well, guess what? There is no burnt offering in heaven, right? Jesus was sacrificed once and then sat down at the right hand of God. Well, guess who the drink offering is poured out on? Israel. How poetically justice is it that, I know I said that wrong, but I hope you get the point. Is it that the very people who sacrificed Christ are now having the cup offering poured out on them as though they are the burnt offering? In other words, God takes those who offered his son, and now he's offering them up as the sacrifice to his church, to his temple. We have just enough time to come back here to Leviticus 26. We'll end with this passage. We're going to start in verse 21. This is obviously God writing through Moses to his people. Leviticus 26, starting in 21. Then if you walk contrary to me and will not listen to me, I will continue striking you sevenfold for your sins. And I will let loose the wild beast against you, which shall berave you of your children, and destroy your livestock, and make you few in number, so that your road shall be deserted. And if by this discipline you are not turned to me, but walk contrary to me, then I also will walk contrary to you, and I myself will strike you sevenfold for your sin. By the way, don't forget Matthew 27, how we went down through the progression of the pestilence and then the beast. We follow a very similar line here in Leviticus 26. Continue in verse 25. And I will bring a sword upon you, and shall execute vengeance for my covenant. If you gather within your cities, I will send pestilence amongst you, and you shall be delivered into the hand of the enemy. When I break your supply of bread, 10 women shall take your bread in a single oven, and shall dole out your bread again by weight, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. But if in spite of this you will not listen to me, but walk contrary to me, then I will walk contrary to you in fury, and I myself will discipline you sevenfold for your sins. You shall eat the flesh of your sons, and shall eat the flesh of your daughters. And I will destroy your high places, and cut down your incense altars, and cast your dead bodies upon the dead bodies of your idols, and my soul will abhor you. It's quite graphic. And I'll leave you with some of the paraphrase of Josephus. In 70 AD, blood literally ran down the streets. Like rivers, Josephus said. Bodies were heaped upon bodies. And yes, women ate their own children. I find it hard to overcome the graphic and specific ways that these curses were played out and recorded in history at this time of history. Furthermore, I think it's amazing the way these events, through the persecution of the church, is turned around and destroys the destroyers and delivers the church from this persecution. Thank you for your time. Lord willing, next week we'll go through 15th chapter, which is real short, and start into